Humans really do that to create life? Can I try?
Alien Girl HFY Sci-Fi. Hello everyone, before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us.
Where are you watching from?
Drop your city or country in the comments below.
Thank you very much.
Now, let's get back to the main character. James stood silently in the cold winds of the alien planet, his breath misting in the frigid air as the bitter cold bit into his exposed skin. A small frown creased his brow as he checked the readings on his wrist device. Nothing seemed out of the ordinary. The mission was routine, yet the planet felt different, somehow unsettling. He shifted uncomfortably in his spacesuit, the metallic joints of his exoskeleton squeaking under the weight of his equipment. As a human pilot and officer for the Galactic Exploration Corps, he had been on countless missions, but this was the first time he had ever been assigned to a distant, unexplored planet where no human had set foot before. It was a strange feeling, the hum of anticipation vibrating in his chest, but it was quickly replaced with a sense of unease when he noticed something, or rather, someone, moving on the edge of his vision. He adjusted his helmet, his eyes narrowing behind the visor as he caught a glimpse of the alien figure. The creature was tall, with smooth, glimmering skin that appeared to shimmer in the cold light of the distant stars. Her long, flowing hair glowed faintly with an ethereal light, the color shifting with every step she took. Her eyes, a piercing shade of violet, locked onto him, and for a brief moment, he felt a strange pull, as if something deep within him was drawn to her.
But that was impossible, right?
He quickly dismissed the thought as absurd, refocusing on the task at hand. The alien woman, however, was still there, staring at him with an intensity that made his heart skip a beat. There was something oddly captivating about her presence, something that made the usually confident James feel vulnerable. He shook his head, trying to clear his thoughts. But the feeling persisted. He had heard of these creatures before, members of the Acellarn species, a race known for their mysterious beauty and intellectual prowess. They were rumored to possess abilities beyond human understanding, but never in his wildest dreams did he imagine meeting one face to face. As she approached him, the air around her seemed to hum with energy, and James felt his pulse quicken.
Are you lost, human?
Her voice was melodious, a deep, resonant tone that seemed to vibrate in his very bones.
James was momentarily stunned, struggling to find his words.
No, he managed, his voice sounding far more uncertain than he intended.
I'm just here on a mission.
The alien woman tilted her head slightly, her violet eyes glimmering with what James could only describe as curiosity, or perhaps something more. A mission to do what exactly? She asked, taking a slow step toward him, her body swaying gracefully. He wasn't sure if it was the way she moved or the way she spoke, but every part of his being was suddenly alert, focused entirely on her. To study this planet, its resources, and its inhabitants, he replied, his voice steadying as he regained his composure. The alien woman's lips curved into a slight smile.
And what will you do once you finish your mission? Will you leave, or will you stay and learn something far more interesting?
The question caught him off guard, and for a moment, he didn't know how to respond. There was a depth to her words, a hidden meaning he couldn't quite grasp. He paused, unsure of what to say, and before he could continue, the alien woman spoke again, her voice almost playful now. You humans, she said, a laugh barely concealed in her tone, always so focused on the task at hand, but never daring to ask the right questions. James felt his heart race as he realized she wasn't just speaking to him, she was challenging him, testing him in some way. And for reasons he couldn't explain, he found himself intrigued. What do you mean by that? He asked, his curiosity getting the better of him. The alien woman's gaze softened as she took another step toward him. Perhaps, she said, her voice lowering, you're not as different from me as you think.
You humans, always so curious about life, about creation. You want to understand it all, but have you ever wondered what it means to truly create life? To give it form, to shape it as you see fit? James blinked in surprise, the gravity of her words sinking in. He had heard many things about alien species, their philosophies, and their cultures, but nothing had ever prepared him for this. Her gaze was unwavering, and for the first time in his life,
James felt as though he were standing on the edge of something truly unknown, something both thrilling and terrifying.
"What are you asking me?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper.
The alien woman smiled again, a slow, knowing smile, and James felt his heart race in his chest. "I'm asking if you are ready to truly understand what it means to create life," she said, her tone both serious and playful.
"And I'm asking if you can teach me how it's done."
The air between them seemed to hum with energy as their eyes locked, and James could feel the unspoken challenge in her words. For the first time in his life, he realized that the mission he was on had just taken a very unexpected turn. James stood frozen for a moment, unsure how to respond to the alien's words. He had been trained for diplomacy, for exploration, but nothing in his training had prepared him for this strange encounter, this unusual request. Elia's violet eyes glimmered as she observed him closely, almost as if she could read his every thought. He glanced away, trying to find the words, but his mind was spinning. The very concept of creating life was something he had never considered outside of scientific theory, and now, here she was, asking him to teach her. The wind howled softly around them, the planet's chilly air cutting through his suit as he shifted uncomfortably. He cleared his throat.
"I don't," he began, but Elia raised a hand, silencing him.
"You're human," she said, her voice steady but tinged with curiosity.
"You understand things about life, about its creation, that I do not. On my world, we learn about life through observation, through the process of evolution, but you..." She paused, her gaze softening. "You humans create life with intention, with purpose." "It is intriguing."
James felt a slight chill run down his spine, but this time it wasn't from the cold. Her words were unsettling, not
because of their intensity, but because he realized she was right.
Humans, in a way, had the power to shape life, to alter the very course of biology. But he had never thought of it in those terms.
"What do you want from me?" he finally asked, his voice hesitant.
Elia took a step closer, her long, flowing hair shimmering in the low light of the distant stars.
"I want to understand," she said, her voice softer now. "I want to know if I can learn what you know. If I can create life, as you do."
James felt his heart race as her words settled in. He had spent his entire life as a soldier, a pilot, a man of action. But now, he was faced with a question that went beyond tactics and missions. This was something far more intimate, something that challenged everything he thought he knew about biology, about humanity.
"I'm not sure what you mean," James said, his voice low, confused by the sudden shift in their interaction. "You can't just..." He trailed off, unsure of how to finish the thought. Elia, however, was not deterred.
She moved closer, her presence commanding yet gentle.
"You have a way of creating life," she repeated.
"Perhaps not with your hands, but with your ideas, your emotions. You bring life into existence through your connections with others, through your shared experiences." James stared at her, trying to make sense of her words.
"You think we create life just by being with each other?" he asked, his brow furrowing. "Is that what you mean?"
Elia's eyes sparkled with something deeper now, a mixture of fascination and understanding.
"Not just being with each other," she said, her voice filled with conviction. "You humans create life by understanding it, by nurturing it, by sharing yourself.
You connect with others on a level that transcends biology.
That is the power you possess."
James could feel the weight of her words hanging in the air between them.
His mind raced as he tried to grasp the meaning behind them. Could it really be that simple? Could the act of connecting with another being be what truly brought life into the world? Or was she simply asking too much from him?
He swallowed hard, the question she posed lingering in his thoughts.
Could he show her how to create life, in the way humans understood it? Could he even begin to explain the complexities of human relationships, emotions, and connections?
Elia stepped closer, her hand gently brushing against his arm, bringing him back to the present.
"I want to understand you," she said, her voice softer than before. "I want to understand why your species is so different, so capable of creating bonds that transcend even the limitations of your bodies." James didn't know how to respond. He had always thought of humans as just another species in the galaxy, nothing special. But now, faced with Elia's intense curiosity and her deep desire to understand humanity, he couldn't help but feel a sense of pride, something he hadn't felt in a long time.
He looked at her, her alien features glowing softly in the dim light, and for the first time since they met, he truly saw her not just as an alien, but as someone who was trying to understand what it meant to be human. "I don't know how to explain it," he said quietly, his voice uncertain. "But maybe we can figure it out together." Elia's smile was almost imperceptible, but the warmth in her gaze was unmistakable. She nodded slowly. "Together," she repeated. And for the first time, James felt as if he had just embarked on a journey that would change everything he thought he knew about life, about creation, and about the bonds that connected all living beings. James and Elia walked side by side through the alien landscape, the wind howling around them as they made their way to a small, sheltered cave. The stars above were scattered across the vast expanse, shining like tiny diamonds against the pitch-black sky. It felt like the universe was watching them, waiting for something to happen. The tension between them was palpable, yet unspoken. Elia's violet eyes were focused on the ground ahead, her thoughts clearly elsewhere. James couldn't help but notice the way her glowing skin seemed to shimmer under the starlight, the subtle patterns shifting with every step she took. Despite the cold, she moved with an elegance that seemed almost supernatural. "Are you cold?" James asked, breaking the silence. Elia glanced at him, her expression unreadable. "Cold is a human concept," she replied, her voice calm but distant. "It does not apply to my species in the same way. But I can feel discomfort, yes." James nodded, unsure of what to say next. He was still processing everything she had told him. The idea of creating life was so foreign to him, but the more he thought about it, the more he realized that Elia wasn't just curious. She was seeking something deeper, an understanding of humanity that went beyond the surface. As they reached the cave entrance, Elia turned to him. "James," she said, her voice softening, "do you truly believe that humans can create life with their emotions? With their connections to one another?" James paused, considering her question. It was something he had never really thought about. He had always been focused on survival, on the next mission, the next challenge. But now, with Elia standing before him, looking at him with such intensity, he wondered if there was more to life than he had realized. "I think," he began slowly, "that humans create life through the connections they make with each other. It's not just about biology or reproduction. It's about the bonds we form, the way we care for each other, the way we nurture those relationships." Elia's eyes narrowed slightly, as if she were processing his words. "And you believe that's what creates life? That it is not just about the physical act, but about the emotional connection?" James nodded, his expression thoughtful. "Yes. In a way, it's like planting a seed. You nurture it, care for it, and eventually, it grows into something meaningful." Elia seemed to contemplate his words, her gaze softening as she looked up at the stars. "I have seen how humans care for each other," she said quietly. "I have observed it from afar, but I have never truly understood it. Until now." James felt a strange warmth spread through him at her words. There was something about Elia that made him feel understood, something he hadn't felt in a long time. He wasn't sure if it was her alien nature, her desire to learn about humanity, or simply the way she looked at him, but it made him feel connected to her in a way he couldn't explain. As the night wore on, they sat together in the cave, the fire crackling between them. Elia asked him more questions, probing deeper into human nature, into the essence of what it meant to create life. And with each answer, James felt as though he were discovering something new about himself, about humanity. It wasn't just about survival. It was about the way people cared for one another, about the emotional bonds that formed the foundation of life itself. And in that moment, as they shared their thoughts under the vast expanse of stars, James realized that perhaps this mission, this strange encounter with Elia, wasn't about exploring a distant planet at all. It was about exploring something much deeper, the connections that bind all living beings, human and alien alike. "James," Elia said, her voice soft, breaking his thoughts, "do you believe that our connection, the one we are forming, could be the beginning of something new?" James turned to her, his heart beating a little faster. He wasn't sure what the future held, but in that moment, he felt a sense of possibility, of something greater than just a mission. "Maybe," he said, his voice steady but filled with an unspoken hope. "Maybe it could be." As the days passed, the strange bond between James and Elia grew stronger.
They spent long hours talking, exploring the alien planet's terrain, and trying to understand each other's worlds. James found himself captivated by Elia's intelligence and curiosity. It was clear that she wasn't just trying to learn about humanity for academic purposes, she was seeking something deeper, something personal. And with every passing moment, James felt more and more drawn to her. One evening, as they sat together by a campfire, the light dancing across their faces, Elia turned to him, her violet eyes reflecting the warmth of the flames. "James," she said quietly, her voice tinged with a sincerity that took him by surprise, "you've taught me so much about humanity, about how your kind creates life. But I want to know more.
I want to understand what drives you, what makes you care." James looked at her, his heart heavy with the weight of her question. It wasn't the first time she had asked him to explain the complexities of human emotions, but this time felt different. Her gaze was softer, more vulnerable, as if she were seeking something from him that went beyond mere knowledge. He hesitated, unsure of how to respond. He had always been the quiet, stoic type, never one to open up about his feelings. But there was something about Elia, something that made him want to share more, to let her see the parts of him he had kept hidden for so long. "It's not easy to explain," he said slowly, his voice low.
I guess humans care because we have to. Life is fragile, and the connections we make with others are what keep us going. We care because, in the end, it's those bonds that define us. It's what makes us human."
Elia listened intently, her expression unreadable, as though she were trying to digest every word he said.
"I see," she said after a long pause. "So, it's not just about survival. It's about meaning." James nodded. "Exactly. We fight to survive, but we live to create meaning.
We find it in each other, in the relationships we build, in the lives we touch." Elia's eyes softened as she looked at him, and for a moment, there was a silence between them, filled with an unspoken understanding. James couldn't quite explain it, but in that moment, it felt as though they had crossed some invisible threshold. Their connection had deepened, and he felt more exposed than ever before.
But strangely, he didn't feel vulnerable. He felt alive.
"James," Elia said softly, her voice almost a whisper, "I think I understand now. I think I finally understand what it means to truly care." The words hung in the air, and for the first time, James felt as though he had given something of himself, something intangible, something that couldn't be measured in data or facts, but in the quiet, profound exchange between two beings. As the fire crackled, casting flickering shadows on the rocky walls of their shelter, James realized that this planet, this strange encounter, had changed him in ways he couldn't yet fully comprehend.
He wasn't just exploring an alien world anymore.
He was exploring himself, exploring what it meant to connect with another soul in the most profound way possible.
Elia leaned forward slightly, her eyes meeting his. "James," she said, her voice steady but filled with an intensity that sent a shiver down his spine, "will you teach me more? Will you show me what it means to truly live, to truly create life?"
James felt his heart beat faster at her words, and for the first time since they had met, he saw not just an alien before him, but a fellow traveler, a being who, like him, was searching for something deeper, something that transcended
the boundaries of species and life itself.
"I will," he said, his voice firm but filled with a quiet resolve.
"I'll teach you, Elia.
But I think, in the end, we're both going to learn something from each other." She smiled, a smile that held both mystery and promise, and for the first time, James felt as though he was no longer alone on this journey. They were in this together, both exploring the unknown, both discovering what it meant to create life, not just in the biological sense, but in the connections that bound them as two very different beings on a shared path.
The fire flickered out as they sat in the quiet night, the stars above them a silent witness to the bond that had just begun to form between them.
As the days continued to pass, James and Elia grew more comfortable with each other, their bond solidifying with each conversation, each shared moment. They had become a team, in the truest sense of the word. Elia's curiosity about humanity had only deepened, and she began asking more profound questions about James' world, questions about emotions, relationships, and what it truly meant to live.
James found himself answering them with an openness he hadn't known he was capable of.
It was as if Elia's presence had unlocked something in him, something he had long buried beneath the weight of his duties as a soldier and pilot.
One evening, after another long day of exploration, they found themselves once again around a fire, the flickering flames casting long shadows on the rocky cave walls.
The air was colder now, the chill seeping deeper into their bones, but the warmth from the fire made it bearable. Elia sat opposite James, her gaze focused on the flames, her mind clearly far away. James could sense her thoughts were racing, as they often did when she was deep in contemplation.
"You know," Elia said softly, breaking the silence, "I've been thinking about what you said the other night about how humans create life through connection, through caring for one another." James glanced at her, his curiosity piqued. "What about it?" he asked.
Elia's violet eyes met his, and for a moment, there was a hesitation in her gaze, as if she was unsure of how to continue.
"I've been trying to understand it, but it's so different from how we view life. On my planet, we learn about life from a distance. We observe it, we study it, but we don't necessarily feel it the way you do." James nodded slowly, understanding what she was getting at. "I guess that's the difference between observing life and living it," he said, his voice thoughtful. "Humans experience life on a deeper level. We don't just observe, we feel, we connect, and that connection is what gives our lives meaning." Elia's expression softened as she listened to him.
"And you believe that this is what gives your species its strength?" she asked.
James smiled slightly. "I do.
We're not the strongest, not the smartest, but our ability to connect with others, to form bonds that transcend just survival, that's what makes us unique.
That's what allows us to overcome almost anything."
Elia was quiet for a long moment, her eyes searching his face as if trying to understand him completely. "I wonder," she said, her voice barely a whisper, "if I could ever understand what that feels like.
To truly feel that connection."
James' heart skipped a beat at her words. There was something so raw, so vulnerable in her tone that it made him want to reach out to her, to help her understand what he was saying.
"You already do," he said softly. "You're not as different from us as you think. You're learning, Elia. And that's the first step."
Elia looked at him, her gaze intense. For the first time, James saw a flicker of something deeper in her eyes, something more than just curiosity.
It was longing, perhaps, or even hope. "I want to understand you, James," she said, her voice full of sincerity. "I want to understand this connection you speak of. I want to know what it feels like to be a part of something greater than myself."
James felt a lump form in his throat at her words. He had never imagined that he would be the one to help an alien species understand the very essence of what it meant to be human. But here they were, two beings from vastly different worlds, sharing something far more profound than either of them could have expected. "You're already a part of it," he said, his voice steady but filled with emotion.
"You're already part of something greater, Elia. You just need to open yourself to it." Elia's lips parted, and for a moment, she seemed to be on the verge of saying something more, something that might have bridged the final gap between them. But before she could speak, a sudden gust of wind howled through the cave entrance, cutting through the stillness. The fire flickered wildly, casting dancing shadows on the walls. James and Elia both turned toward the sound, their senses on high alert. "What was that?" Elia asked, her voice tinged with concern.
James stood up, his hand instinctively going to the weapon at his side.
"I don't know," he said,
his eyes scanning the entrance.
"But we should be ready."
They both moved toward the cave's opening, their steps synchronized as they prepared for whatever might be coming next. The air outside felt colder, sharper, and James could sense that something had shifted.
The tension that had been building between him and Elia wasn't just emotional anymore.
It was something more tangible, something that would force them to face whatever dangers lay ahead together.
As they reached the entrance, James looked at Elia, his expression determined.
"Stay close," he said, his voice firm. "Whatever's out there, we'll face it together." Elia nodded, her violet eyes shining with a resolve that mirrored his own. The unknown was waiting for them, but in that moment, they both knew that they would face it as one. James and Elia stood at the cave entrance, their senses heightened as the wind howled around them. The sky above had grown darker, and the distant stars flickered like pinpricks of light in a sea of black. The air had taken on a strange, electric quality, and James couldn't shake the feeling that something was coming. He glanced at Elia, her violet eyes glowing faintly in the dim light. She stood tall beside him, her posture alert, her gaze fixed on the vast, empty horizon. "Do you feel that?" he asked, his voice low. Elia nodded, her face expressionless but her body tense. "Yes," she replied, her voice steady. "There is something out there. I sense it." James tightened his grip on his weapon, his muscles coiling in readiness. Whatever was coming, he knew they had to be prepared. "Stay close," he said, his voice firm but calm. "We don't know what we're dealing with yet." Elia stepped closer to him, her presence reassuring despite the tension in the air. For a moment, the world seemed to hold its breath. Then, a low rumble echoed through the ground beneath their feet. James felt the vibrations travel up his legs, the sensation both unsettling and familiar. Something was moving toward them, something large. "We need to get to higher ground," he said quickly, scanning the surroundings. "Follow me." Without waiting for a response, he turned and began moving toward the rocky ridge that loomed ahead. Elia was right behind him, her footsteps light but swift. As they climbed the rocky terrain, the rumbling grew louder, and James could hear the distinct sound of something or someone moving through the dense brush below. The hairs on the back of his neck stood on end. Whatever it was getting closer. He reached the top of the ridge and paused, peering into the distance. The landscape stretched out before him, the rugged terrain bathed in the soft glow of the distant stars. But there, on the far horizon, a shadow moved. It was massive, too large to be a simple animal or natural formation. James felt his heart race as the shadow grew closer, its shape becoming clearer. It was something alive, something powerful. He turned to Elia, his jaw clenched. "Get ready," he said, his voice barely a whisper. Elia's eyes locked onto his, her expression unreadable. She didn't need any further instructions. Together, they waited in silence, their eyes fixed on the approaching shadow. As the creature drew nearer, James could make out its form, a towering figure, its movements slow but deliberate. It was an alien, unlike any he had ever seen before. Its skin was dark, nearly blending into the night, and its limbs were long and muscular. Its eyes glowed with an eerie light, casting an unsettling glow across the landscape. James felt a shiver run down his spine. This was no ordinary creature. The alien stopped a few yards away, its gaze fixed on them. There was an odd stillness to the air, as if the world had paused, waiting for something to happen. James tightened his grip on his weapon, his mind racing. He didn't know what to do, whether to fight or retreat. The alien's eyes flickered between him and Elia, its gaze lingering on her for a moment longer. Then, with a slow, deliberate motion, it extended a hand. "You are not from here," it said, its voice deep and resonant. James blinked in surprise. The alien spoke in a language he didn't understand, yet somehow, he felt the meaning of its words in his chest. It was as if the creature's intentions were being communicated directly to him, bypassing the need for words. Elia stepped forward, her eyes narrowed. "We are not," she said in her own language, her voice steady. "But we are here to learn, to understand." The alien regarded her with interest, its glowing eyes brightening. It seemed to consider her words for a moment before it spoke again, its voice calm and measured. "Then you must learn quickly," it said. "The world is changing. The balance has shifted." James exchanged a glance with Elia, his mind racing. He had no idea what the alien meant by the balance, but something told him that whatever was happening, it was far beyond anything they had ever encountered. "What do you mean?" he asked, his voice steady despite the uncertainty gnawing at him. The alien remained silent for a moment, its eyes scanning the horizon. "You will understand soon enough," it said finally. "But first, you must make a choice." James felt a chill run through him at its words. A choice. What kind of choice could the alien be talking about? He turned to Elia, his gaze meeting hers. They both knew that whatever lay ahead, it was not something they could face alone. They had come to this planet as explorers, seeking knowledge. But now, they were caught in something much larger, something that would test them in ways they never imagined. What kind of choice? James asked again, his voice rising slightly. The alien's gaze locked onto him, and for a brief moment, James thought he saw a flicker of something, regret, perhaps, or sorrow, pass through its eyes. The choice to stay, it said softly, or the choice to leave. But remember, once the choice is made, there is no turning back. James stood frozen for a moment, the weight of the alien's words pressing down on him. His heart raced as he tried to process what was being asked of them. He glanced at Elia, and in that moment, he knew she was feeling the same uncertainty, the same fear. They had crossed into unknown territory, and there was no turning back now. James felt the weight of the alien's words pressing on him, the atmosphere thick with the tension of what had just been asked of them. The alien's hand remained outstretched, the dim glow of its skin casting long shadows against the cave walls. Elia stood beside him, her gaze fixed on the alien, a quiet intensity in her eyes. For a moment, James didn't speak. His mind raced, trying to process the enormity of the decision in front of them. Stay or leave? What did that even mean? And why was it so important? What would be the consequence of either choice? The wind howled again, but this time it didn't feel like the same wind that had swept through the cave earlier. There was something foreboding about it, a sense of inevitability. He could feel Elia's presence beside him, steady and strong, and yet, he knew she, too, was uncertain. What happens if we leave? James finally asked, his voice calm but laced with curiosity. The alien's eyes flickered in the dim light, as though considering the question before it spoke. The balance will remain, it said simply. But the world will change, and you will never understand why. James frowned, still trying to grasp the meaning of its words. And if we stay? He pressed. The alien's expression shifted slightly, its eyes narrowing in what could have been sorrow or perhaps a deeper understanding. Then you will become part of the change, it said, its voice softening. You will see the world as it truly is and understand the forces that drive it. But be warned, this path is not without sacrifice. The cost is more than you may be prepared to pay. James took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the decision settle in his chest. There were no guarantees, no simple answers. The path forward was shrouded in mystery, and yet, something within him stirred. He had always been driven by curiosity, by the desire to understand the unknown. This was no different. He turned to Elia, his eyes meeting hers. He could see the question in her gaze. What do you think? He asked her, his voice quiet but filled with uncertainty. Elia studied him for a long moment, her expression unreadable. Finally, she spoke. I think, she began, her voice soft but filled with conviction, I think we have to stay. We've come this far. If we turn back now, we might never understand what we're meant to learn here. James nodded slowly, his heart beating faster as the decision began to crystallize in his mind. He had always known that the path of discovery was never easy, that true understanding came with a price. But this felt different. It wasn't just about exploring a new world or learning about an alien species. It was about discovering something deeper, something fundamental about life itself. I agree, he said, his voice steady. We'll stay. The alien's expression softened, as if it had been waiting for them to make that choice. Then you have made the right decision, it said, its voice resonating with a quiet finality. Prepare yourselves. The journey ahead will not be easy, but it will be worth it. With that, the alien stepped back, its form blending into the shadows, disappearing into the night as though it had never been there. James and Elia stood in silence, the weight of their decision settling on their shoulders. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The world around them felt still, as if holding its breath, waiting for what came next. James took a step forward, his mind focused on the path ahead. The unknown loomed before them, but for the first time in what felt like forever, he felt ready to face it. He glanced at Elia, who was standing beside him, her expression resolute. Together, they turned and began walking into the unknown, knowing that whatever lay ahead, they would face it as one. The path ahead was shrouded in uncertainty as James and Elia walked deeper into the alien landscape. The world around them felt different now, more alive, more charged with an energy they couldn't quite explain. The wind had died down, and the stars above were clearer, almost too bright.
It was as if the entire universe was watching them, waiting for the next step. They had chosen to stay, to face the unknown together, but as they walked, James couldn't shake the feeling that they were not alone. Every shadow seemed to move, every gust of wind carried whispers he couldn't understand. Elia was walking beside him, her pace steady, but he could see the way her eyes darted around, sensing something he could not. "Do you feel that?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. James nodded, his senses alert. "Yes," he said quietly. "Something's different. Something's watching us." Elia glanced at him, her expression unreadable. She had always been the more composed of the two, her alien nature giving her a calm, almost detached demeanor. But even she couldn't hide the unease that flickered in her eyes. "I think we've crossed into something deeper," she said, her voice filled with a quiet understanding. "This place, it's not just a planet. It's a crossing point, a place where the fabric of existence itself is thin." James didn't fully understand what she meant, but he knew she was right. They were no longer just explorers. They were part of something far larger, something that transcended their understanding of the universe. The terrain around them began to change. The rocky surface gave way to a strange, pulsating energy that seemed to ripple through the ground. It was like walking through a dream, a world where the laws of nature didn't quite apply. Elia stopped, her hand outstretched, her fingers brushing the air in front of her. "This is it," she said softly, her voice filled with awe. "This is what we were meant to find." James stepped closer, his eyes scanning the area. The ground before them shimmered with a soft light, and in the distance, a towering structure began to emerge, its shape both alien and familiar. It was like nothing he had ever seen before, part organic, part mechanical, as though the planet itself had grown this place, weaving together biology and technology in a way that was beyond human comprehension. "What is that?" James asked, his voice filled with wonder. Elia's eyes narrowed as she studied the structure. "I don't know," she replied, her voice a mixture of excitement and caution. "But I think it's calling us." Without another word, she began walking toward the structure, her steps purposeful. James followed, his heart pounding in his chest. They had made their choice, and now there was no turning back. As they drew closer, the air around them seemed to hum with energy. The structure loomed before them, its surface alive with glowing patterns that shifted and moved, as though the building itself was aware of their presence. Elia reached out and touched the surface, her fingers brushing the patterns. The moment her skin made contact, the structure responded. A low, resonant hum filled the air, and the glowing patterns shifted, revealing a door, a gateway into the unknown. Elia turned to James, her expression serious but determined. "This is it," she said. "We have to go inside. This is where it all begins." James nodded, his mind racing. He didn't know what awaited them on the other side, but he knew they had come too far to stop now. Together, they stepped through the doorway, the world around them shifting and changing as they entered the heart of the structure. Inside, it was unlike anything they had ever imagined. The walls pulsed with energy, the air thick with the scent of something both alien and familiar. In the center of the room stood a figure, tall, with long flowing robes that shimmered with the same light as the walls. Its face was hidden, but there was no mistaking the presence of this being. It was not a creature of flesh, but something more. Something ancient. The figure's voice echoed in their minds, deep and resonant. "You have chosen to stay," it said. "Now, you will understand the truth." James and Elia stood in silence, their hearts racing, as the figure's presence filled the room. Whatever they had entered, it was a place of immense power, a place where the lines between life, energy, and existence itself blurred. The figure's form shifted, revealing a holographic map of the galaxy, with their location marked at the center. "You are standing at the crossroads of worlds," the figure continued. "What you learn here will change the fate of all beings. But the choice you have made has consequences." James felt a cold shiver run down his spine. What consequences? He opened his mouth to speak, but the figure silenced him with a gesture. "All will be revealed in time," it said. "For now, you must prepare. The balance is shifting, and your place in this new world is yet to be written." As the figure faded back into the shimmering light,
James and Elia were left standing in the heart of the structure, the weight of their decision settling on them. They had chosen to stay. Now, they would have to face whatever came next, together. The room seemed to hum with energy, the walls pulsing around them as the holographic figure faded into the shimmering light.
James and Elia stood motionless, their breaths the only sound in the otherwise silent chamber.
The figure had spoken of consequences, of fate, but its words left more questions than answers.
The
weight of their decision hung in the air like a dense fog, and James could feel the gravity of it pressing down on him. He turned to Elia, his mind racing with the enormity of what they had just learned.
"What do you think it meant?" he asked, his voice quiet but filled with uncertainty.
Elia, ever calm, stared into the space where the figure had been moments before, her violet eyes narrowed in thought.
"I'm not sure," she replied, her tone thoughtful. "But I think it's saying that we've crossed a threshold. That we're no longer just observers, no longer just explorers. We're a part of something much bigger now."
James absorbed her words, trying to make sense of them.
He had come to this planet seeking knowledge, but now he realized that they were no longer just searching for answers, they had become part of the story, part of a larger web that spanned beyond their understanding. The room around them seemed to react to their thoughts, the light shifting and changing in response to their presence. It was as though the space itself was alive, aware of their every move. "Do you think we're ready for this?" James asked, the question more to himself than to Elia.
Elia turned to him, her expression unwavering.
"I think we have no choice but to be," she said, her voice steady. "We've come this far. There's no turning back now."
Her words were simple, but they carried a weight that James couldn't ignore.
He knew she was right. There was no going back.
The choices they had made had set them on a path that would change everything about themselves, about the galaxy, about the very nature of life itself. As the minutes passed, the light in the room shifted again, and a new sound filled the air, a soft, melodic hum that seemed to emanate from the structure itself.
It was a song, or perhaps a call, and it seemed to beckon them forward. "I think we're being summoned," Elia said, her voice barely a whisper.
James nodded, his heart beating faster as he stepped toward the center of the room, drawn by the energy that surrounded them. The walls seemed to open, revealing a passageway that led deeper into the structure.
It was as though the building itself was inviting them to continue, to explore further. Without another word, they moved forward, stepping into the unknown.
The passageway was narrow, winding through the heart of the structure, and the air grew warmer as they walked. It was as if the very walls were alive, pulsing with energy, guiding them forward. As they moved, James couldn't help but feel a sense of anticipation, as though they were on the cusp of something monumental. The passage opened into a vast chamber, larger than any they had seen before. At the center of the room stood a massive, glowing orb, its surface shimmering with a light that seemed to come from within. The orb was surrounded by intricate carvings and symbols, ancient and mysterious. As James and Elia approached, the orb pulsed once, sending a wave of energy through the room.
A voice, deep and resonant, echoed in their minds.
"Welcome," the voice said, its tone both soothing and commanding. "You have come far, but the journey is not yet over. The choices you make now will determine the future of all worlds." James felt a chill run down his spine as the voice spoke. It was not a physical voice, but a voice that seemed to come from within, as though the very fabric of reality was speaking to them.
Elia stepped forward, her eyes fixed on the orb.
"What do you mean?" she asked, her voice steady but filled with a quiet urgency. The voice did not answer immediately. Instead, the orb's light grew brighter, and the symbols on the walls seemed to shift and change, as if they were alive. "The balance has been disturbed," the voice finally said.
"The threads that bind the worlds together are unraveling. You are the key to restoring that balance, but the path will not be easy. You must choose, will you preserve the order of the universe, or will you allow it to fall into chaos?"
James felt his heart race. The weight of the choice ahead of them was almost too much to bear. But as he looked at Elia, he knew one thing: they would face this together. The unknown was before them, but they had already made their decision. They had chosen to stay, to embrace the path that lay ahead. And now, as the chamber pulsed with energy, they would face whatever came next, united in their journey, whatever it might bring.